Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Easy English Story Lab. Today we will practice English with a B1 to B2 level story. Listen carefully. Pause the video. Repeat after me. Copy the pronunciation, rhythm, and emotion. This is the shadowing technique. Now let's begin. My name is Clara. I am 26 years old, and last winter I almost made the biggest mistake of my life. Or at least that is what I believed at that time. I had a flight to Chicago early in the morning. It was not a vacation. It was not a trip for fun. It was something much more important. I had a final interview for my dream job. For months, I had prepared for this opportunity. I practiced answering difficult questions. I updated my resume again and again. I imagined myself working in that office, sitting at a large desk, wearing elegant clothes, finally feeling successful. This job meant independence. It meant leaving my small town. It meant proving to myself that I was capable of something bigger. The flight was at 7:40 a.m. I set 3 alarms: 5 a.m., 5:10 a.m., 5:20 a.m. But life does not always follow our plans. When my first alarm rang, I felt extremely tired. I had barely slept because I was nervous. I remember turning off the alarm and closing my eyes, just for 1 minute. That 1 minute became 30. When I opened my eyes again, sunlight was already coming through the window. I grabbed my phone. 6:32 a.m. My heart almost stopped. The airport was 40 minutes away. I jumped out of bed, my hands shaking. I put on my clothes quickly. I did not even look at myself in the mirror. I ran outside and called a taxi. "Please come fast," I told the driver. "It's urgent." The taxi arrived in 8 minutes, but it felt like an hour. During the ride, I kept checking the time. 6:49, 6:56, 7:03. Traffic was heavier than usual. Red lights felt endless. Every second felt like it was attacking me personally. "Can you go faster?" I asked. "I'm trying," the driver replied calmly. "But we must be careful." Careful. I did not want careful. I wanted fast. At 7:18 a.m., we finally reached the airport. I threw money at the driver, grabbed my suitcase, and ran inside. The airport was full of people: families, business travelers, students. Everyone seemed calm and organized. Except me. I ran to the check-in desk. The woman behind the counter looked at her computer and then at me. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "The gate is closed." I stared at her. "No, no, please. My flight is at 7:40. "Yes," she said, "but boarding closed 10 minutes ago." 10 minutes. I was 10 minutes too late. I felt something break inside my chest, not physically, emotionally. "Is there anything I can do?" I asked. She shook her head. "You can rebook for the next flight, but it's at 3:15 p.m. My interview was at 11 a.m. I stepped away from the desk slowly. My legs felt weak. I sat down on a cold metal chair and looked at the airplanes outside the window. One of them was probably mine. I imagined the plane taking off without me. I imagined someone else getting the job. I imagined my parents saying, "You should have been more responsible." Tears started filling my eyes. I had worked so hard, and now it was over because of 30 stupid minutes. I called the company. My voice was shaking. "I'm so sorry," I said. "I missed my flight. Is it possible to reschedule the interview?" There was a long pause. "I'm afraid that will be difficult," the woman on the phone answered. "The hiring team is only available today. Only today." I thanked her politely and ended the call. I sat there for another 15 minutes. completely lost in disappointment. People walked past me, talking, laughing, drinking coffee. The world continued moving forward, but I felt frozen. I kept thinking about how unfair it was. Why today? Why me? Why now? Finally, I stood up and walked slowly toward the exit. I felt embarrassed, angry, and small. Outside, the cold winter air hit my face. I looked up at the sky and whispered, "This is the worst day of my life." But I had no idea that this worst day was only the beginning of something I could never have predicted. As I opened my phone to call another taxi, a loud sound came from inside the airport. At first, I thought it was construction. Then people started running. Security alarms began to ring. I turned around. Something was happening. And suddenly, missing my flight did not feel like the biggest problem anymore. When I turned around, the airport doors opened suddenly and people began rushing outside. Some were shouting. Others were speaking quickly into their phones. I could not understand what was happening, but I could feel that something was wrong. Security guards ran past me. One of them said, "Please stay calm and move away from the entrance." My heart started beating fast again. Just minutes ago, I was crying because I missed my flight. Now I was standing outside, watching chaos. I stepped aside and looked at my phone. Social media was already full of messages. Emergency at the airport. Technical issue. Flight delays. Then I saw the flight number. My flight number. My hands became cold. I clicked on the post. There had been a serious mechanical problem during takeoff. The plane had returned to the runway immediately after leaving the ground. Smoke had been seen near one of the engines. No crash, no explosion. But it was serious. Very serious. I felt like the air had disappeared around me. If I had arrived 10 minutes earlier, I would have been on that plane. I imagined myself sitting by the window, listening to music, thinking about my interview. I imagined the moment when the engine failed, the fear, the panic. I swallowed slowly. The news said that all passengers were safe, but some had been injured during the emergency landing. Safe. The word felt heavy and powerful at the same time. I sat down on a bench outside the airport. My legs were shaking again, but for a different reason now. 10 minutes. 10 minutes had separated two completely different versions of my life. In one version, I was sitting on that plane, possibly injured. In this version, I was outside, breathing cold winter air. I did not know whether to feel grateful or terrified. My phone rang. It was my mother. "Clara, are you okay?" she asked immediately. "Yes," I said. My voice was quiet. "I missed the flight." There was silence on the other end. "You missed it?" she repeated. "Yes." Another pause. "Thank God," she whispered. I closed my eyes. Until that moment, I had only seen missing the flight as a failure. But now it felt like protection. Maybe it was luck. Maybe it was coincidence. Or maybe it was simply life reminding me that I am not in control of everything. After a few minutes, my breathing became normal again. But something else began to grow inside me. A question. If I was not meant to be on that plane, then what was I meant to do today? I looked at the airport again. Emergency vehicles were arriving. News reporters were setting up cameras. The entire place felt tense and serious. I realized something important. For months, I had believed that this job interview was the only path to my future. I had treated it like the final chance. Like if I did not get it, my life would stop moving. But standing there, watching ambulances and flashing lights, I suddenly understood how small that fear was compared to losing something much bigger: my life, my safety, my ability to stand there and feel the wind on my face. I opened my email again and read the rejection message from the company. It still hurt. Of course it did. I had wanted that job deeply, but the pain was softer now, different. I called the company one more time. "I understand if it's not possible to reschedule," I said calmly, but I wanted to explain what happened. The woman on the phone sounded surprised when I mentioned the emergency. "Oh," she said, "yes, we heard about that. I'm glad you're safe." We talked for a few minutes. Her tone became warmer. "Let me speak to the hiring manager," she said. "No promises, but we'll see what we can do." When I ended the call, I did not feel desperate anymore. For the first time that morning, I felt still, clear. Something inside me had shifted. I realized I had been living in constant pressure, always planning, always worrying about the future, always afraid of failure. But today showed me something unexpected. Sometimes what looks like a disaster is actually protection. Sometimes what feels like a failure is simply a different direction. As I waited outside the airport, I looked at the sky again. It was gray, but not dark. Maybe this day was not the worst day of my life. Maybe it was the day that changed everything. My phone buzzed again. It was an email from the company. My heart started beating fast once more, but this time it was not fear. It was possibility. I stared at the email for several seconds before opening it. My heart was beating slowly now, not fast like before. I had already experienced the worst emotions that morning. I had felt disappointment, fear, embarrassment, and relief. Whatever this message said, I told myself I would accept it calmly. I opened it. "Clara, we understand the unusual situation this morning. We would like to reschedule your interview for tomorrow at 10 a.m. Please confirm if you are available." I blinked. Tomorrow. They were giving me another chance. I read the message again carefully, just to be sure I was not misunderstanding anything. It was real. The opportunity was still there, but something inside me had changed. An hour earlier, I believed missing the flight was a disaster. I believed I had destroyed my future because of 30 careless minutes. I felt angry at myself. I felt weak. I felt irresponsible. But now, after everything that had happened, I saw the situation differently. If I had arrived on time, I would have been sitting on that plane when the engine failed. I would have experienced fear at 30,000 feet in the air. Maybe I would have been physically hurt. Maybe I would have been emotionally shaken for months. Instead, I was standing outside, safe. That realization stayed with me. I confirmed the interview immediately and booked a new flight for later that evening. This time, I arrived at the airport extremely early. I did not want to repeat the same mistake, but I also noticed something new about myself. I was not panicking. I was not desperately checking the time every minute. I was simply present. While waiting at the gate, I watched other travelers. Some were stressed, some were calm, some were laughing. Everyone was living their own story, facing their own invisible struggles. For the first time, I understood something clearly. I am not the center of the universe. My problems feel big to me, but they are just one small part of a much larger world. The flight that evening was smooth and quiet. When we landed in Chicago, I felt grateful just to walk out of the plane. The next morning, I prepared for the interview carefully. I wore a simple but professional outfit. I reviewed my notes, but I did not try to memorize perfect answers. Instead, I decided to be honest. When I entered the office building, I noticed how bright and modern it looked. A few days ago, I would have been extremely intimidated by that environment. I would have compared myself to others. I would have worried about not being good enough. But after the airport incident, my mindset had shifted. During the interview, one of the managers asked, "How do you handle unexpected problems?" I almost laughed softly. "I had an experience yesterday that answered that question for me," I said, and I told them everything. I explained how I overslept, how I missed my flight, how I felt like a failure sitting at the airport, and how I later discovered that the plane had a serious mechanical issue. "I realized something important," I said calmly. "Sometimes we think we have lost something, but in reality, we are being protected." That experience taught me to stay flexible and calm, even when things do not go as planned. The interviewers looked at each other. One of them nodded. "That's a strong lesson," he said. We continued talking for almost an hour. We discussed teamwork, communication, and personal growth. But I noticed that the conversation felt natural, not forced. I was not trying to impress them desperately. I was simply sharing who I was. When I left the building, I did not know whether I would get the job. But I knew something more valuable. I respected myself. A week later, I received another email. I got the job. I was excited, of course. I celebrated with my family. I called my best friend. I felt proud of the months of preparation. But honestly, the job was not the most powerful part of the story. The most powerful part happened outside the airport. Before that day, I believed success meant control, perfect timing, no mistakes, no delays, no weakness. Now I understand that real strength comes from adaptability. Life will always surprise us. Flights will be missed, plans will change, opportunities will disappear and reappear. We cannot control everything, but we can control how we respond. That morning taught me patience. It taught me humility. It taught me that sometimes the universe closes a door for reasons we cannot immediately understand. If I had not overslept, I would never have learned that lesson. Sometimes a delay is not rejection. Sometimes it is redirection. Now, whenever something goes wrong in my life, I pause before reacting. Instead of saying, "Why is this happening to me?" I try to ask, "What is this trying to teach me?" That small change in thinking has made a big difference. Missing that flight did not just save my safety, it saved my perspective. And sometimes perspective is more powerful than success. Great job! Now play the video again. Pause after each sentence. Repeat out loud. Copy the pronunciation, rhythm, and emotion. This is the shadowing technique. It helps you speak English more naturally and confidently. If you enjoyed this story, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. See you in the next story.